Welcome everyone to Dr. John Bedker's Leadership Podcast, the podcast focused on leadership. The episode will begin shortly. Thank you so much for tuning in. Enjoy the podcast.
Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Dr. John Bedker Leadership Podcast. I am your host, John Bedker. Well, today we're going to talk about three people. As this episode is titled, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Kind of a movie theme, but unfortunately it's real life. So we're going to talk about the current president, Joe Biden. We're going to talk about the Republican vice president nominee, Senator J.D. Vance. And we're going to talk about a Supreme Court Associate Justice, Clarence Thomas. Now, different places, different positions, different times, but we're going to talk about their leadership core competencies. Really important. Where do you learn about a person most? You learn about that person not in that day-to-day, but under pressure, under stress, under those moments where you really need to reveal yourself. Each of these people has done that, and we're going to talk about each of them from a leadership point of view. Well, as the saying goes from the Clint Eastwood movie, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, I'll do them in that order. Each one has an important role, I think, for you to listen to. So let's begin. The good. The good is about the current president, President Joe Biden. Why do I say that? From a leadership point of view. Be very clear about that, as I always am. Because ultimately, as we say over and over on this podcast, leadership is ultimately about doing the right thing. And so, sometimes that's really hard to do. Sometimes it takes us a good while to come around to do it. And I've made that point. Easy to say, leadership is about doing the right thing. Sometimes very, very difficult to do. Let's talk about President Biden. 50 years of public service, multiple experiences, demonstrated a commitment to serve uncommon in American history. And his production, extraordinary, consequential, many people have said in the public press. The legislation that has been passed, the uplifting of lives of Americans is a matter of record. Remember, leadership is about the truth, not what we'd like to think, like to hope, or like to say, but the truth. Really, really important. And so when we do a factual look, as Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan said many years ago, everyone is entitled to their own point of view. I really believe that. It's important. It makes us a richer people, a richer nation. But while we are all encouraged to have our own point of view, we are not able to have our own facts. Facts are just that, facts. And so we have to recognize factually what is the truth. And in the case of President Joe Biden, there is a long history of contribution, of commitment, and factual record. And so what he has done is uncommon, is extraordinary, and is difficult. As most people know, he has chosen not to run again for re-election to President of the United States, a position he could have, and I think for a long, long time was very much committed to doing. But age has caught up with him, and for a long time, many people, including me, have said age is a factor that we must consider when we think about leadership and the capacity to deliver leadership, particularly in the case of President of the United States, because it's not only a nation, but he is quite largely a world leader. So it's quite difficult to really come and think about that in the context of doing the right thing. It took a long time, maybe too long, some would argue. Close friends, close allies, he became agitated with, concerned that they were telling him to pass the torch in the interests of the country, in the interests of the American people, and in the interest of our world. Well, this has gone on for a good while, and now President Biden has made that fateful choice. That choice to do the right thing and pass the torch to a younger generation. I cannot tell you how consequential, how huge, literally, that decision is for a person with over 50 years of service to say it's time to pass the torch. It's not something that's done freely, easily, willingly, but it is something that is absolutely essential for the good, the common good. And ultimately, and absolutely clearly, President Biden has done that and said, I am going to do the right thing. Difficultly, but I am going to do it. He will, in fact, address our nation this evening and give details about that process and the conclusion that he has reached to do the right thing. So what do we see here? We see an exemplar in the most difficult of times, in one of the most stressful of jobs, one of the most consequential positions on our planet, to step aside and pass the torch. And so for this, we call this the good. This is an exemplar. This is really at the heart and soul of what leadership core competency is about. Doing the right thing. Okay, so we start with that. Incredible, and I want to underscore it, incredible exemplar of leadership. Let's go to the next individual. What we're calling the bad. Not a good word, right? But it does paint this small, perhaps too small, a word picture of where we're going with currently Senator J.D. Vance, who is now the Republican Party's nominee to be Vice President of the United States. Now here's a person who came from humble beginnings, good story, wrote a book about it, Hillbilly Elegy. Great book. Well, what happened to the person? Well, as leaders, and that's really what we want to focus on, as leaders, we're always in this process of negotiation, trying to figure out who we really are, what our true self is all about, what our real identity is. Perhaps some fancy words, but it's really something that we do on an ongoing basis throughout our lives. Always in this constant negotiation, renegotiation, to try to test, to try different things, different styles, different ways to be our true self, to seek our true self. Well, J.D. Vance did something quite the opposite. He looked for the path that would take care of him, that would advance him, that would be in his best interest. How could he succeed? So not a journey of self and true self, but a journey of me and about me. Well, how did it manifest itself? Well, following law school, Yale Law School, he tried his hand at venture capital, connected with a person in Silicon Valley, Peter Thiel, and he was, in a sense, sponsored. He became a venture capitalist, not a successful venture capitalist. And in fact, over a period of time, he left Peter Thiel's employment. He then went to another venture capitalist and said, same song, second verse, let me try again. And he did this. And again, was not successful. He was, in fact, let go. And so then what? Then what do you do? He goes back with Peter Thiel and says, I'm thinking of something else. And Peter Thiel says, yes, I think you should run for Senate, and I will finance it, realizing that venture capital was not going to be a place for him to succeed. But if we could get him in a position of power, of position, of authority, that might be a very good thing for someone like Peter Thiel. And so he threw a lot of money at the Senate race in the state of Ohio. J.D. Vance prevailed, won that race, not handily, but he did win. Went to the U.S. Senate. He's been there about 18 months. And already the dividend for that investment in J.D. Vance is paying a large dividend, because now the Republican nominee for president, Donald J. Trump, has selected him as his running mate, as the potential vice president of the United States. Well, how does that one go about doing that when we talk about identity, particularly professional identity? Here we have a person who has been an absolute anti-Trumper, has made a number of statements about Trump being an opioid and being like a Nazi. I mean, words that are just, ooh, yuck, just incredibly inflammatory. Statements not only not kind, but damning to Trump. Points of view damning to Trump. And now he's his number two, his literally right-hand man. What does that say in terms of leadership? Well, we have to think about that, right? Let's look at some basic competencies that I talk about frequently. Can you trust a person like that, who on one day says a series of highly inflammatory statements, and I shouldn't say one day, but over a long period of time, but at one time says these inflammatory statements and then reverses themselves literally 180 degrees, dramatically different? It makes you wonder. Trust is based upon trustworthy behavior, right? We know that as a leadership matter. What has been demonstrated here is quite the opposite. Let's look at some leadership core competencies quickly. Communication. Holy cow. Said all these hugely inflammatory things about Trump over a long period of time, and now is saying exactly the opposite. Well, the communication, frankly, has got to be suspect. What about judgment, decision-making? What's your values? What values proposition guides you as a leader? We have to think about that, particularly if we're going to vote for someone like this. We need to understand what makes them tick, what drives them. And that judgment and decision-making, oh my God, appear to be literally absent. Trust we've touched upon. And so we have this individual, J.D. Vance, I'm calling the bad. Because from a leadership point of view, he does not have those character components, the professional identity components, the understanding of self, let alone true self. This is bad. Okay, let's go on to the third one. The Associate Justice of the Supreme Court, Clarence Thomas. Now here we have a person who, in a very different position, but has shown incredible lack of ethics, of following the rule of law, the very job that he is in position to uphold. That in itself just is a showstopper. But we have now seen through investigative reporting, revealed in the public press, no secrets, no surprises. Again, have your own points of view, but you do not get your own facts. The facts are at least $4 million in gifts. And this number, frankly, is rising. So we don't know with precision the exact total, but it does, in fact, exceed $4 million because we're already there now and investigations are continuing. Lavish travel, private jets, incredible trips, forgiveness of gifts. So how does a person whose supposed motivation in life is to provide justice under the law, equal justice under the law, to be a judge, when in fact you cannot follow the law yourself? Failures to say, I have taken millions of dollars in gifts and not reported them. Well, folks, that's a problem. That's a leadership problem because leaders don't do that. And it's an ethical problem, a huge ethical problem. And he chooses not to own it. And consequently there, folks, we arrive at this conclusion with Justice Thomas that this is the ugly. It's ugly because we need, in our form of democracy in the United States, these three branches of government. We need the legislature, we need the executive, and we need the judicial branch to uphold their end of the bargain, the checks and balances of one against the other. We have to be able to believe in what they are saying as their best efforts at the truth, at honesty, at fairness, and certainly at justice. In the case of Clarence Thomas, we have none of that. And so, with that, I call him the ugly. So what we have here today is a leadership review of the good, the bad, and the ugly in real time. President Joe Biden doing this incredible thing of stepping aside in the most difficult of ways after 50 years of public service. We've got a young person whose compass is completely out of whack, J.D. Vance, Senator Vance, who one day hates a person, the next day seems to have exactly the opposite feelings, and in fact becomes their running mate, in fact their soulmate, so that whatever Donald Trump says, he is on board with and is okay doing that, regardless of the truth, regardless of the facts, and regardless of his own moral and ethical compass. He says, I'm okay bending that way. And so we call him the bad. And last, perhaps the least attention, but also perhaps the most egregious offense. A person wearing a robe in the highest court in the land, an Associate Justice of the United States Supreme Court, taking millions of dollars in gifts. What do we wind up having here, folks? In the case of the bad and the ugly, of Vance and Thomas, we have people who have been purchased. People whose self has been purchased by power. Because those people know that I will have a disciple here, a person who will do whatever I say, however wrong, however corrupt, however unethical, however legally inappropriate, and yet they will do it. Because their benefactors, the people that have put them in these positions, enabled them to be in these positions, realize that they have purchased something of great value that will pay them dividends in many ways, whether it's appearance before the court, a piece of legislation in Congress, or whatever. It's a difficult time, folks. But I don't want you to lose sight that we do have good. We have many good people and good leaders on all sides of the aisle. But we have others that are really bad and ugly in terms of their practice of leadership, the fulfillment of their responsibilities to the American people and to our world. Okay, 3 people: Biden, Vance, Thomas. The good, the bad, the ugly. Thank you all so much for listening. I sincerely appreciate it. Take care, and we will talk soon.
Thank you for tuning in to Dr. John Bedker's Leadership Podcast. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please tell your friends, and, of course, please follow our podcast and subscribe. Thank you again for tuning in.